Hi, this is Mark Hoske with Control Engineering at CFE Media. I'm here with
Constantine Antoniou, and I am a cybersecurity business consultant working with Schneider Electric. Our team is called the Global Cybersecurity Solutions and Services Team, and we help move along their cybersecurity footprint and their cybersecurity posture.
So when we look at IT and OT, how can integration or collaboration between IT and OT help with cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think, well, the core issue there is that for years there has always been this development of how the IT layers in a corporation built and how it shifted down to having this large, the way OT projects were developed over years. Often OT isn't top of mind when it comes to the way the executives are making decisions about risk and about money. And IT teams for a lot of years did get a lot more of that funding. So part of the divide is set up between trying to protect enterprise assets and making sure that systems like laptops, keyboards, banking systems, any of these kind of mission critical or enterprise critical systems are up and running. And that's what the job of the IT department. Now, of course, if you work for a consumer packaged good firm or a life sciences firm, you can be in a situation where you're building out your operational technology floor. As anybody knows, project by project, these things are developed in a way that is not, it's not like somebody has a master plan and develops a process line in one day. It's something where an initial project, an initial budget is put together to try and create, let's say, product X, right? And product X ends up being a success, but not as much as a success as they thought by year 3. And someone then goes, hey, you know what, I think we're gonna revamp this plant and it's gonna do product X still, but we're gonna add product Y and product Z. And when that happens, it's maybe a different project team. And as these things continue through time, you end up with a very, I don't wanna say hodgepodge, but a lot of the systems were ad hoc, were designed at times for that specific process line and maybe not holistically. So you have that in your OT space. You have a lot of situations where you have assets, different control products, different mixed vendor infrastructure. And these products are all connected together on one floor. Never mind the fact that there's a lot of modern devices that break what's called the Purdue model that allow technology to jump up a bunch of levels from the control layers and the device layers up into enterprise type connections. And from that, now we have this more of a dependency between how the IT organizations and how the OT organizations have to collaborate. And the problem is, traditionally, there's a lot of bad blood and there's a lot of history. And almost every company I went into in my time, I have found this same divide. Some companies are doing a much better job. I heard of one company that actually had spent the time to take their OT leadership and their IT leadership to a like sweat lodge type, let's all get together, kumbaya, let's talk about how we're going to work together. And I often say when we tell these stories, people laugh a lot. It becomes funny, but I always say it wouldn't be, it would be funny if it wasn't so costly. And in the end, organizations are sort of waking up that they have to do this. So the advice we often give is, maybe baby steps at the beginning. We're not going to solve that rift in a couple meetings, right? Or one project. Part of it is figuring out how you're going to fund cybersecurity assessments for your plants, and that's at the executive level. If you're at the executive level and you haven't thought about cybersecurity assessments yet, you're kind of in a situation where you maybe need to think about that soon, because there are ways that if you don't know what you have, it's the old, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And feeding back to what I said about the ad hoc designs, you end up with networks that have so many different systems talking, and nobody really has a clear idea of exactly what's on the network.
So you've made a nice list here, the 5 pillars of operational cybersecurity. Could you kind of walk through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So where we start with, and I'll just read them all out to begin with. The first is to identify what you have. The second is to figure out what has permissions. What do you permit to talk and be authorized on your network? What people are authorized? How do you protect those assets? What protection systems do you have in place? And I'll go into each of these in a minute. What do you have, and how can you detect anomalies as they occur? How are you monitoring your network performance? And are you aware of any intrusions that can happen on the OT layer as well as IT? And finally, how do you respond? What is your backup disaster recovery plan? Do you have one? Is there a way for you forensically to determine what happened after a cyber attack or a ransomware attack? And what is your incident response plan? So going into more detail, when we talk about identify, this is the assessment part I was speaking of earlier. You want to figure out what you have and what level of maturity they have, what level of patching has been done, because there's going to be a lot of equipment. I mean, I've been to sites where they're just afraid of a piece of equipment. It is so old, but it works. And they're nervous to do an upgrade project for it. No one can tell you what firmware revision's on there. And many of those devices end up, when you really do the research, our team does this stuff all the time, we can tell them, hey, you dodged a bullet because this one has several zero-day events attached to it. You probably need to find a better way to set up your network, right? So that's the part of the audit assessment part, and the gap analysis is part of that, like figuring out where the gaps are in your governance, what gaps you have between different parts of what you think you have and the way your network is set up, right? And so the asset inventory is part of that, right? When we get to permit, now we're talking about authentication, authorization, accounting. So how do you know who has been in and used what system? What devices are allowed to talk on what parts of the network? How do you create a properly segmented network so that your absolutely critical assets are the furthest from any attack vector? And not that you want anything to be attacked, but there are certain things that would be less critical if they were. Setting up things like multi-factor authentication. We all know about this from our banking accounts and online accounts, but there are many ways to set up multi-factor authentication for credential systems, because very often we have people that leave a company and the credentials are not erased or not replaced, or there's not necessarily somebody responsible for that. And that's how we end up with holes in the system. Again, how your network segmentation is set up, what kind of secure remote access system you have. So if you do allow contractors to connect into your system and you have a secure remote access system from, 2010 or 8, and you haven't updated it, there's a good chance the current methods of cyber attack and sabotage would have an ability to break through your system. So there are more modern secure remote access systems. And then, of course, naturally, physical security is extremely important, right? So there are some systems or places we look at where the cost of creating a really high-level cybersecurity perspective from a hardware standpoint is so cost prohibitive and it's not in their budget. Sometimes we will see the physical security they have and go, we think your risk is relatively low for this type of attack or that type of attack. However, make sure you fix this, make sure you fix that. So a lot of it goes into stuff like that, right? When we get to protect, now we're talking about the tools, right? The technology that you're going to use. So what type of anti-malware software do you use? Not just on your IT level, but down to your OT servers and software. What kind of endpoint protection do you have? What kind of firewalls are you implementing between your process network, your DMZ, and your enterprise network? Removable media control is a big deal. We all, I always say this, I have one on me because we're doing this talk, but we all have these, and they're great, and they're really handy, and they're really useful. But if you don't have a process within your OT network to have them scanned and reviewed before they're plugged into any of your assets, you are opening yourself up to potential cyber attacks. And again, back to patch management, who's responsible for patching your OT devices? And beyond that, once they're patched, who's responsible for maintaining what level the patching is at? And that's part of a cybersecurity management system. And that's a whole other topic we could talk to you about another time. But it's a big thing that you really should be moving towards, is having a cybersecurity management system for your organization. Now, when we get to detect, now we're talking about some of the really fancy new tools that we have these days. In the last decade, but specifically the last 5 years, there's a number of very high-level OT cybersecurity tools that have been deployed from a software and a hardware perspective that allow companies to do things like, let's call it SIEM, Security Information and Event Management. This is a platform that would often sit in what's called a Security Operations Center in your IT layer, and it's something that brings in events and basically security events and management and all sorts of other. If you have tools like Clarity or Nozomi or other companies like that, make these great software packages that can do baseline monitoring against a baseline and giving you alarms based on anomalous traffic behavior, stuff like that. That can come into one console where people can make smart decisions about what they're going to do about whether something is a cyber attack or not, and mobilize, right? Beyond that, there's things like tools that do great network performance monitoring. Anomaly detection and intrusion detection are two of the biggest ones that companies like Clarity and Nozomi do. They put you in a position where you can sense when something is not quite right. Process control systems, as probably most of you know, have a more predictive way of communicating with each other. You can figure out the baseline. It's not like an IT network where any number of devices could be communicating at any given time. Finally, for Respond, we're talking about what is your plan for your backup disaster recovery. Are you planning appropriately? Do you have a plan? Have you ever run a drill? Do you have a team responsible for this? In a lot of cases, a lot of people find out once they have the disaster that they don't really have a very good backup, or that their backup system was on the same network as the ransomware network. And that's where we have to go, well, I wish you brought us in sooner. We would have been able to tell you to separate that. What kind of forensic tools do you have? Do you have the ability after a cyber attack to see what had happened? Or are you just left doing this? We really don't know what happened. Insurance will probably require you to demonstrate really clearly what did happen. So that's challenging. And then what is your incident response plan? So if you find your way to trying to figure out which one of these, many of these, basically we recommend something from every pillar, but you want to be in a position where, and this is something where we and other companies like ours can help you try to figure out where you are, what your cybersecurity posture is like today, and how you could potentially move to a cybersecurity posture of the future that would keep you properly protected and able to recover very quickly if an attack does occur, or better yet, never have one occur.
Thanks, Constantine.
My pleasure.